Workplace bullying. Yes, that can become a safety violation in Hawaii, and it may eventually make its way into the mainland and across the
And you
United
mean
States.
a work comp, like workplace bullying would actually be a work comp injury?
Absolutely would be. It says here in the Insurance Journal that bullying, abuse, and verbal harassment in the workplace may cause employees physical and psychological harm. Victims would be eligible for workers' compensation. The National Institute for Occupational Safety defines workplace bullying as intimidation, slandering, social isolation, or humiliation by one or more persons against each other. It reminds me of a bad boss that I had years ago who will remain unnamed. We're going to call him Bill. Anyways, Bill was, oh my goodness, he was absolutely one of the worst bosses I've ever worked for. One day he would come in and he was all sunshine and glory and happy, and how you doing? Everybody's great. Oh, you're doing wonderful. So proud of you. And the next day he came in and you had better duck and cover. He was screaming and you could just hear him down the hall as he made his way toward your office, and you're like, oh my goodness, I know it's coming. I just know it's coming. He was terrible. It turned out later on he was on cocaine. Believe it or not, one of those things that you find out after you leave the company because you can't stand it one more moment. But he was a classic example of this.
Well, and then I don't know if it should be covered. I'm not sure I really think that's a workplace injury that I really happy that Hawaii is choosing to support in their quarter, that they're talking about making part of workers' compensation. That's really hard to define. And I think it could be fit somewhere else a lot easier. A lot of times when you're doing workers' compensation, you're covering that kind of stuff. If we're already having fraud, if we're already having people that will
make a claim at the drop of a hat.
If we can't test it, if we can't fight it, and we're talking about psychological, it fits into so many other categories. This is really broadening. It's going to make what could it do? It can make again. I'm not a licensed insurance agent. I'm not a broker. I've read a few stories about insurance, and that's where I'm coming from. But I think it would affect a lot of different people costs. It's
right.
And I definitely want people to be able to, go to court and go to court over somebody that's being abusive or bullying, but I don't think that's something that the state should be fitting into this program. I think it had a lot different beginnings than that.
Well, you could be right, but to play devil's advocate, that would be something very similar to what many people said in the 80s about EEOC law and sexual harassment. Sexual harassment was widespread because I worked in the 70s and the 80s. Well, I didn't work in the 70s, but I worked in the 80s and I worked into the 90s. Sexual harassment was widespread and nobody was calling it for what it was, and there was nothing being done about it until Anita Hill came out and made a big stink with Clarence Thomas. I'm not saying she was right. I don't know what happened. But Anita Hill and the Clarence Thomas debacle really brought it to a forefront, to a point where people suddenly said, you know what, maybe we can define what sexual harassment is and what it isn't. And this might end up being that kind of situation too. Some of it's rather obvious. Some of it you can define, some of it you can't define. And I'll agree with you, it could be slippery. But I think that case law would establish it. Not that I think that it's necessarily good or bad, but I do think it's something that probably will become.
That would be the first state that had really any type of case law against this.
Right.
So, Hawaii does a lot of new stuff other than other states. And
sometimes it's not good, but sometimes it is. It'll be interesting to see what happens with this one.